So, one of the big things about World War One is the new technologies that come out with it. Typically, before World War One, most battles and most military technology had been kind of static for a couple hundred years. You had infantry, which were soldiers, and the soldiers would march, they'd fire guns at each other. Yay, we're good. You'd also have the cavalry, which were soldiers on horseback who would also engage in battle. Yeah, we're good. Now we're going to have changes in types of guns in the centuries before World War One, but on the whole, the tactics of battle were very similar, and the weapons of battle were very similar. But with World War One, we have new technologies which start to change what battle was like. So I have a couple examples of this. The first one that I want to go over is the telephone, which is probably the most important technology that changes during World War One. The telephone was invented in the late 1800s, and by World War One, if you were wealthy, you had access to a telephone. Now, the telephone wasn't what we know today, where it's wireless, you can pick it up, you can kind of call anywhere. It is very much based on wires and landlines, and you do need operators to work the telephone. So it's a bit more limited than what we see today. That being said, it did allow generals, it did allow commanders in the field to send and receive orders at lightning speed. And this is really important. Before World War One, if you wanted to send orders, you were going to send out a person either on foot or on horseback, and you are going to hope that they get there. You are really going to hope that they get there. But now with a telephone, you can get the orders to them not instantaneous, but as instantaneous as possible. You pick up the phone, it goes to one of the operators who I'll talk about later, and you're going to get the message to them within minutes. So this can be a message to retreat. This can be a message to go forward. So the pace of warfare is actually going to change. It's going to go from being a bit slower to much quicker because the telephone allows people to send these messages back and forth much quicker. The telephone is also going to create opportunities for more people to be participants in the war front, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Now, a downside to the telephone is the fact that it becomes a little easier to, spy on your enemies. Now, you could do that with messengers beforehand. So you could capture a messenger and steal the plans or torture the plans out of your messenger. You can capture the messenger and the messenger could be working for you. But now, with the rise of the telephone, you are able to tap the telephone and you're able to kind of listen in on it. So this leads to the need for different codes to be developed. And these are going to be oral codes versus written codes. And you need more people who are adept with these oral codes. And so that's going to kind of change how military information is transferred, how it comes across, because of the fact that we are now shifting types of codes with that. So the telephone really starts to change life in the war. Another big change of life in the war are tanks. So the first tanks were sort of kind of developed in the 1860s, and we see them a little bit actually in the American Civil War. But these tanks were kind of similar to bicycles with big covers over them, and they're not very helpful. Well, during World War I, we start to have more mechanized tanks that are closer to what we'd see today. So the tanks were kind of basic in a way. These were cars, because cars had been invented by this point, but they didn't have a lot of maneuverability. So the tanks in this era were usually used for going across no man's land, the area between the trenches, and for just taking out the barbed wire. It was really basic. You can't do quick turns on the tanks. You can do a little bit of firing guns from the tanks, but not a lot. They're really just there for getting across no man's land. Moreover, the metals that are covering them are not the strongest. We're still developing stronger metal alloys. So if you're in a tank, it doesn't provide as much protection as you would like. But this does start a new phase in military warfare, particularly because we're going to see the rise of tanks being used in World War II. So this is starting a new trend. Another major change in World War I is the use of submarines. Now, we actually have plans for submarines and very basic submarines going back to the 1500s and a little bit into the 1400s with Leonardo da Vinci. Submarines had actually even been used in warfare in the American Revolution and in the American Civil War. But these were very limited. The technology didn't exist to the point where you could travel across the Atlantic, travel across oceans in a submarine. So in the previous wars, in the American Revolution and in the American Civil War, when we see submarine warfare, it's usually limited to a close to land and to river warfare. Most of the time, it will be hand-powered or steam-powered in these early wars. The earliest submarines in the American Revolution are actually going to look like bicycles underwater. In the American Civil War, it'll be steam-powered. But technology has advanced to the point where in World War I, we have submarines that can go far into the ocean. They can cross the ocean, and they can do so on their own power, so much so that they don't have to surface as much. This is a response to the rivalry between Britain and Germany in trying to dominate naval warfare, the development of submarines. Because with a submarine, it means that you have control of the sea. This is a very effective form of warfare. One, you can sneak up on your enemy very effectively and torpedo them, send out a missile and take them down. Moreover, there's a psychological impact that comes with submarines. You don't know where they're coming from because we don't have sonar at this point. And even by the time we get to World War II, where there is sonar, the sonar is going to be a little sketchy. So you don't know where they're coming from. And so as you're traveling across the ocean on a ship, which was really the only way to do so at this point, you don't know if you're going to make it alive. And it's a brilliant tactic. Like, it's a scary tactic, but it is a brilliant tactic in how to control the enemy. Now, initially during the war, there had been an agreement that the submarines would not attack passenger ships. So they would only attack military ships. However, the Germans in particular were notorious for loosely defining what a military ship was. So the British and Americans had a very, very bad habit of putting munitions and goods for the British and the French onto passenger ships to try and sneak these goods through. And so the Germans said, well, if you're putting goods onto a passenger ship, that automatically makes it a military ship. And so they would torpedo passenger ships, which is why we have the sinking of the Lusitania and other passenger ships. So submarine warfare was initially supposed to be regulated only towards military ships, but it starts to affect any ship crossing the ocean. So much so that multiple governments, particularly the British and the Americans, will say, okay, well, we're telling our citizens, do not cross the ocean. There's a good chance you will not make it across the ocean because of submarine warfare. So submarine warfare starts a new shift in technology to having naval warfare that is much more deadly and that is much more stealth-like. And that'll influence World War II, and it'll influence the Cold War a good bit, and even warfare today. Today we have a lot of military subs that patrol our lands and do a lot of spy work underground. So every so often you'll hear about this in the news. Okay, now the most important technology I would argue to come out of World War One, were the planes. Planes was a very recent technology, and there was this race to control the skies to say who had the best Air Force. Now, they don't call it an Air Force yet, we're getting there, but who basically had the best Air Force. Now, the planes during World War One were very, very basic. You couldn't go very far. They were difficult to maneuver. They were largely made out of cloth, so they're not very sturdy. But with the rise of planes and having air forces, we see a completely new type of warfare take off. This is aerial warfare. Now, there have been attempts at aerial warfare in previous wars. So during the Franco-Prussian War in the late 1800s and during the American Civil War, there had been attempts at aerial warfare by using hot air balloons. Well, hot air balloons kind of don't work very well because they can only go one way and they can only, they're very difficult to maneuver, going up and down. So hot air balloons don't work very well, but they're good for reconnaissance. But now with planes, we can actually do aerial warfare where people are flying, they're dropping bombs, and they are having dogfights in the air. They're shooting at each other, trying to control the skies. Because people realize, the tacticians realize very quickly, if you can control the skies, you can control the population under the skies. So for example, if I can control all the skies between here and Oklahoma City, I never have to send land troops here. Because guess what? Somebody goofs up, I will send a plane that will drop bombs, and I'm good. I don't have to worry about troops. I just needed to send that one plane. So we're starting to see a new type of warfare. Now this warfare gets very glamorized very, very quickly. And I have the example of the very famous Peanuts cartoon. This is Snoopy, and there's an ongoing skit with Snoopy where he's fighting the Red Baron. And the Red Baron was a German pilot who was very glamorized, both by, basically by everyone. He was such a good pilot. He did all of these stunts. It took a while for them to take him down, but he was just such a good pilot. And there was this glamorization, this romanticization of, okay, well, these people are in the air. They are doing death-defying work. Who knows if they will make it back to land? And people glamorized the Air Force very much so in this period. We can see that glamorization today with movies, such as Top Gun, which there's an 80s movie and there's a 2020s movie with it. So there's a glamorization, a romanticization of the pilots, but a lot of it also just comes from the fact that they are doing very death-defying work and they are changing how warfare acts, going from something that's on the ground or in the oceans to something that's in the skies, and to something where you can have a lot of control just by being able to control the air. And that's something that's really going to impact World War II, as we'll see.